complete history of Russia. Russia is the largest country on Earth, stretching across 11 time zones and 2 continents. Its vast territory spans frozen tundra, endless forests, towering mountains, and open grasslands. But Russia was not always the powerful nation we know today. Its story began more than 1,000 years ago with scattered tribes, ambitious rulers, and a network of rivers that connected distant lands. This is the story of how Russia was born. Long before the first Russian state emerged, the lands of Eastern Europe were inhabited by hunter-gatherers, and later by Finno-Ugric peoples. Over time, East Slavic tribes settled across the region, building villages near rivers and fertile lands. They farmed crops, raised livestock, hunted in the forests, and traded with neighboring communities. Although divided into many tribes, they shared similar languages, customs, and traditions. The geography of the region shaped their way of life. Vast rivers such as the Dnieper, Volga, and Volkhov became natural highways that linked settlements across enormous distances. These waterways connected the Baltic Sea in the north with the Black Sea in the south, allowing merchants to travel between northern Europe and the wealthy Byzantine Empire. Trade brought not only goods, but also new ideas, technologies, and cultural influences. During the 9th century, Scandinavian traders and warriors, known as the Varangians, began traveling along these river routes. They sailed their longships deep into Eastern Europe, trading furs, honey, wax, and slaves for silver, silk, and luxury goods from Constantinople. The Varangians gradually became influential in the politics of the region. According to the medieval primary chronicle, a Varangian leader named Rurik was invited to rule the city of Novgorod around the year 862. Although historians continue to debate the details of this account, Rurik is traditionally regarded as the founder of the dynasty that ruled the early Russian state for centuries. Under his leadership, political stability began to emerge among the diverse communities of the north. After Rurik's death, his successor Oleg expanded southward. Recognizing the strategic importance of the city of Kiev, Oleg captured it and declared it the center of his growing realm. This new federation of territories became known as Kievan Rus, situated along the trade route between Scandinavia and Constantinople. Kiev quickly developed into one of Eastern Europe's most prosperous cities. As trade flourished, Kievan Rus grew stronger. Merchants carried valuable goods between north and south, while skilled craftsmen produced weapons, jewelry, and tools. Wealth from commerce strengthened the authority of the princes and allowed towns to expand. Fortified settlements appeared across the region, protecting trade routes and local populations. One of the most important rulers of Kievan Rus was Prince Vladimir, who came to power in the late 10th century. Vladimir understood that a united state required more than military strength. He sought a common religion that could strengthen political unity and establish closer ties with powerful neighboring civilizations. In the year 988, Prince Vladimir adopted Eastern Orthodox Christianity after forging close relations with the Byzantine Empire. According to tradition, many of the people of Kiev were baptized in the Dnieper River. This decision profoundly changed the future of the region. Orthodox Christianity shaped architecture, literature, education, law, art, and political culture for generations. Magnificent churches with shining domes began to rise across the land. Byzantine artists introduced new artistic styles, while monks copied religious texts and established centers of learning. The Cyrillic writing system spread, making administration and communication more effective throughout the growing state. During the reign of Yaroslav the Wise in the 11th century, Kievan Rus reached one of its greatest periods of prosperity. New cathedrals were constructed, including the magnificent St. Sophia Cathedral in Kiev. The legal code known as the Russkaya Pravda helped organize society and improve justice. Trade expanded, cities flourished, and diplomatic marriages connected Kievan Rus with many of Europe's leading royal families. By this time, Kiev had become one of the largest and most important cities in Europe. Its markets attracted merchants from distant lands, while its churches and monasteries became centers of culture and religion. For a brief period, Kievan Rus stood among the most influential states on the continent. Yet beneath this prosperity, problems were growing. After Yaroslav's death, rival princes competed for power, dividing the realm into separate principalities. Political unity weakened as regional rulers fought for influence and territory. Internal conflict gradually eroded the strength that had made Kievan Rus so successful. As the princes argued among themselves, a new and formidable power was rising far to the east. Across the vast Eurasian steppes, the Mongols were building the largest land empire the world had ever seen. Within a few decades, their armies would reach the borders of Kievan Rus, forever changing the course of Russian history. The unity of Kievan Rus was already weakening when an even greater threat appeared on the eastern horizon. Across the vast grasslands of Central Asia, the Mongols had united under the leadership of Genghis Khan. In just a few decades, they created the largest contiguous land empire in history, conquering kingdoms from China to Eastern Europe. Although Genghis Khan died in 1227, the Mongol expansion did not stop. His grandsons continued their campaigns, pushing ever farther west. One of them, Batu Khan, led a massive army toward the lands of Kievan Rus. In 1237, the Mongol invasion began. City after city fell before the Mongol armies. Ryazan was destroyed after refusing to surrender. Vladimir, Suzdal, and many other towns suffered the same fate. The Mongols were masters of speed, discipline, and siege warfare. Few armies could resist them. By 1240, they reached Kiev. Once one of Europe's greatest cities, Kiev was besieged and eventually captured after fierce resistance. Much of the city was destroyed, and thousands of its inhabitants were killed or enslaved. The fall of Kiev marked the end of Kievan Rus as the dominant political power in Eastern Europe. After their conquest, the Mongols established the Golden Horde, a powerful khanate that ruled much of the Russian lands for more than 2 centuries. Rather than occupying every town directly, the Mongols demanded tribute from local princes. Those who cooperated were allowed to govern, while those who resisted faced harsh punishment. This period became known as the Mongol Yoke. Although modern historians debate the term, there is little doubt that Mongol rule deeply affected the political and economic development of the region. Heavy taxes, military obligations, and repeated conflicts placed great pressure on the principalities. Yet Mongol rule also had unexpected consequences. The need to collect tribute encouraged stronger systems of administration. Some Russian princes gained influence by cooperating with the Khans, gradually increasing their own power over neighboring territories. Among these principalities, one small city began to rise above the rest: Moscow. Founded in the 12th century, Moscow was initially little more than a frontier settlement surrounded by forests. Its location, however, proved highly advantageous. Protected by rivers and dense woodlands, it was easier to defend than many other cities. It also sat at the crossroads of important trade routes. The rulers of Moscow carefully strengthened their position. Rather than openly challenging the Mongols, they often worked with them, collecting tribute on behalf of the Golden Horde. This policy allowed Moscow's princes to accumulate wealth, expand their lands, and increase their political influence. One of the most important early rulers was Ivan I, often known as Ivan Khalida. Through diplomacy and careful financial management, he secured the trust of the Mongol Khans while steadily enlarging Moscow's territory. Under his rule, Moscow also became the seat of the Russian Orthodox Church, increasing its religious importance. As Moscow grew stronger, the power of the Golden Horde slowly declined. Internal conflicts weakened the Mongol state, while new regional powers emerged across Eurasia. Russian princes began to believe that independence might finally be possible. A turning point came in 1380 at the Battle of Kulikovo. Prince Dmitry Donskoy of Moscow united several Russian principalities and confronted the forces of the Mongol commander Mamai. Although Mongol influence did not disappear immediately, the Russian victory at Kulikovo became a powerful symbol of resistance. For the first time in generations, many believed that Mongol domination could be overcome. The final break came a century later under Ivan III, also known as Ivan the Great, ascending to the throne of Moscow in 1462. Ivan transformed the principality into the strongest state in the region. Through diplomacy, warfare, and strategic marriages, he absorbed neighboring territories and greatly expanded his authority. In 1480, Ivan III refused to continue paying tribute to the Golden Horde. The two armies faced each other across the Ugra River in what became known as the Great Stand on the Ugra. Neither side launched a major attack. Eventually, the Mongol forces withdrew. Although no decisive battle took place, the event is widely regarded as the end of Mongol dominance over the Russian lands. After more than 2 centuries, Moscow had achieved independence. Freed from foreign control, Ivan III began creating a centralized Russian state. He adopted new symbols of royal authority, strengthened the government, and rebuilt the Kremlin in Moscow with the help of Italian architects. The city increasingly became the political and cultural heart of the emerging Russian nation. Around this time, many religious leaders promoted the idea that Moscow was the third Rome. After the fall of Constantinople in 1453, they argued that Moscow had become the leading center of Orthodox Christianity. This belief strengthened the authority of its rulers and reinforced the idea that Russia had a unique historical mission. By the end of the 15th century, the fragmented world of Kievan Rus had given way to a new power centered in Moscow. The foundations of the Russian state had been laid, but even greater expansion and greater challenges lay ahead. In the next chapter, a ruler known to history as Ivan the Terrible would become Russia's first Tsar, dramatically expanding the country's territory while ruling through fear, ambition, and sweeping reform. In 1547, a young ruler named Ivan IV made a decision that would change Russian history forever. At just 16 years old, he crowned himself Tsar of all Rus. It was the first time a Russian ruler officially adopted the title of Tsar, a word derived from the Roman title Caesar. With this act, Ivan declared that Moscow was no longer simply another principality. It was the center of a powerful and independent state. During the early years of his reign, Ivan introduced important reforms. He reorganized parts of the government, strengthened the military, and created a new legal code to improve administration. Working with trusted advisors, he sought to centralize power and reduce the influence of powerful noble families known as the boyars. One of Ivan's greatest military achievements came in 1552 with the conquest of the Khanate of Kazan. After a determined siege, Russian forces captured the city, ending centuries of Tatar control in the region. 4 years later, the Khanate of Astrakhan also fell to Russian armies, giving Moscow control over much of the Volga River. These victories dramatically expanded Russia's territory and opened new trade routes towards Central Asia and the Caspian Sea. To celebrate the victory at Kazan, Ivan ordered the construction of one of Russia's most famous landmarks, St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow. With its colorful domes and distinctive design, the cathedral became a lasting symbol of the growing Russian state. As Russia expanded, explorers and Cossacks pushed farther east. Among them was the Cossack leader Yermak Timofeyevich, whose expedition into Siberia in the 1580s marked the beginning of one of history's greatest territorial expansions. Crossing forests, rivers, and mountain ranges, Russian explorers established forts and trading posts across vast stretches of northern Asia. Over the next century, Russia continued expanding eastward at an extraordinary pace. Fur traders, settlers, missionaries, and soldiers gradually extended Russian influence across Siberia. Eventually, they reached the Pacific Ocean, making Russia the largest country on Earth by land area. Despite these remarkable achievements, Ivan's reign grew increasingly harsh. Deeply suspicious of conspiracies, he believed many nobles were plotting against him. In response, he created the Oprytnina, a separate territory under his direct control. Enforced by a special force known as the Oprichniki. The Oprichniki became infamous for their brutality. They confiscated property, executed suspected enemies, and spread fear throughout the country. Entire communities suffered as Ivan's campaign against perceived rivals intensified. His increasingly unpredictable rule earned him the name by which he is still widely known today, Ivan the Terrible. Historians note that the Russian word Grozny is more accurately understood as formidable or awe-inspiring, though his reign was indeed marked by episodes of great violence. One of the darkest moments of Ivan's life came in 1581 during a heated argument with his eldest son and heir, Ivan Ivanovich. According to long-standing historical accounts, the Tsar struck his son with a staff, fatally wounding him. Although some details remain debated, the death of his heir left Russia facing an uncertain future. When Ivan IV died in 1584, the throne passed to his son Fyodor. Unlike his father, Fyodor showed little interest in governing. Real power increasingly rested with his advisor, Boris Godunov. When Fyodor died without an heir in 1598, the centuries-old Rurik dynasty came to an end. The years that followed became known as the Time of Troubles, one of the most chaotic periods in Russian history. Poor harvests caused devastating famine, claiming countless lives. Political instability encouraged rival factions to compete for power, while several pretenders claimed to be the rightful heir to the throne. Foreign powers saw an opportunity to intervene. Poland-Lithuania invaded Russia, and for a time, Polish forces even occupied Moscow. The future of the Russian state seemed uncertain, and many feared that the country might collapse entirely. Yet across Russia, resistance began to grow. In 1612, a volunteer army led by the merchant Kuzma Menin and Prince Dmitry Pozarsky marched toward Moscow. Their forces succeeded in driving the Polish occupiers from the capital, an event that became a powerful symbol of national unity. The following year, representatives from across the country gathered in an assembly known as the Zemsky Sobor. Seeking stability after years of conflict, they elected 16-year-old Michael Romanov as the new Tsar in 1613. The election of Michael Romanov marked the beginning of the Romanov Dynasty, which would rule Russia for more than 300 years. Although the country had been devastated by war, famine, and political turmoil, the Romanovs gradually restored order, rebuilt the economy, and strengthened the authority of the central government. Under the early Romanov rulers, Russia continued to expand across Siberia while rebuilding its military and administrative institutions. Trade slowly recovered, towns were reconstructed, and the foundations of a new Russian empire began to emerge. The hardships of the Time of Troubles had demonstrated how fragile the state could become without strong leadership. The Romanovs were determined to ensure that such a crisis would never threaten Russia again. As the 17th century drew to a close, a young ruler prepared to transform Russia more dramatically than anyone since Ivan the Great. His name was Peter the Great, and his reforms would propel Russia onto the European stage as one of the world's leading powers. By the end of the 17th century, Russia had recovered from the Time of Troubles, but compared with many Western European kingdoms, it remained less industrialized and had limited access to the world's major sea routes. A young ruler named Peter I, later known as Peter the Great, believed that Russia had to modernize if it was to become a major power. Ascending to the throne in 1682 and assuming full authority several years later, Peter was unlike any previous Russian ruler. Curious and determined, he traveled across Europe on what became known as the Grand Embassy. Disguised as an ordinary official, he visited shipyards, factories, military academies, and workshops in the Dutch Republic, England, and other European states. His goal was simple: to learn how the most advanced nations of Europe had become so successful. When Peter returned to Russia, he launched an ambitious program of reform. He reorganized the government, modernized the army, and built Russia's first permanent navy. New schools trained engineers, officers, and administrators, while factories expanded the production of weapons and other essential goods. Although many reforms were unpopular and often enforced through strict measures, they transformed Russia into a stronger and more centralized state. Peter also believed that Russia needed a modern capital connected to Europe. In 1703, he founded St. Petersburg on land captured near the Baltic Sea. Built on marshland under extremely difficult conditions, the new city became the window to Europe. Palaces, canals, and grand public buildings gradually replaced swamps, and St. Petersburg eventually became the capital of the Russian Empire. Peter's greatest military challenge came during the Great Northern War, fought between Russia and the powerful Swedish Empire. At the time, Sweden dominated much of Northern Europe under the leadership of King Charles G. The war lasted more than 20 years and tested Russia's determination. 1709, at the Battle of Poltava, Peter's modernized army achieved a decisive victory over the Swedes. Historians regard this battle as one of the turning points in European history. Sweden's influence declined, while Russia emerged as a major military power. When the war ended in 1721, Russia gained valuable territory along the Baltic coast. Peter adopted the title Emperor of all Russia, marking the formal birth of the Russian Empire. His reforms permanently changed the country's place in European politics. After Peter's death in 1725, several rulers followed before another remarkable leader transformed the empire once again: Catherine II, better known as Catherine the Great. Originally born a German princess, Catherine came to power in 1762 after a palace coup. Intelligent, politically skilled, and deeply interested in Enlightenment ideas, she sought to strengthen Russia while expanding its influence across Europe. During Catherine's reign, the empire experienced significant territorial growth. Russian armies defeated the Ottoman Empire in several wars, securing access to the Black Sea and increasing Russian influence in southeastern Europe. These victories strengthened Russia's economy and expanded opportunities for trade. One of the most significant events of Catherine's reign was the partition of Poland. Together with Prussia and Austria, Russia participated in 3 partitions that gradually erased Poland from the map of Europe by 1795. Vast territories came under Russian control, dramatically increasing the empire's size and population. Catherine also encouraged education, supported the arts, and corresponded with leading European philosophers. At the same time, her reign revealed the deep inequalities within Russian society. Most peasants remained serfs, legally tied to the land and subject to their landlords. While the empire grew wealthier and more powerful, millions of ordinary people continued to live in difficult conditions. By the early 19th century, Russia stood among Europe's greatest powers. Yet a new challenge was emerging in Western Europe. A brilliant French general named Napoleon Bonaparte had conquered much of the continent, and only a few nations remained beyond his control. In 1812, Napoleon launched one of history's largest military invasions. More than 500,000 soldiers crossed into Russian territory, expecting a swift victory. Instead, Russian commanders adopted a strategy of gradual retreat, rather than risking the destruction of their army in a single battle. They withdrew deeper into the country while destroying supplies that could aid the advancing French forces. The largest battle of the campaign took place near the village of Borodino. It was one of the bloodiest battles of the Napoleonic Wars. Although Napoleon claimed the battlefield, the Russian army remained intact and continued its retreat. Soon afterward, Napoleon entered Moscow, but instead of capturing a thriving capital, he found much of the city abandoned. Fires spread through Moscow, destroying large sections of the city and leaving the French army without the supplies it desperately needed. Historians continue to debate the exact causes of the fires, but their impact on the campaign was undeniable. As winter approached, Napoleon ordered his army to retreat. The return journey became a disaster. Freezing temperatures, hunger, disease, and repeated Russian attacks devastated the Grande Armée. Of the hundreds of thousands who had entered Russia, only a fraction returned to Western Europe. Napoleon's failed invasion transformed the balance of power in Europe. Russia emerged as one of the leading forces in the coalition that ultimately defeated Napoleon in 1814. Russian troops marched into Paris, symbolizing the empire's new status as one of the continent's dominant powers. Throughout the 19th century, the Russian Empire continued expanding into the Caucasus, Central Asia, and the Far East. Railways connected distant regions, industry slowly developed, and cities grew larger. Yet beneath this appearance of strength, serious problems remained. Rapid social change, political unrest, and demands for reform increasingly challenged the authority of the Tsar. As the 20th century approached, the Romanov Dynasty faced growing pressure from both ordinary citizens and revolutionary movements. Within a few decades, centuries of imperial rule would come to an abrupt and dramatic end. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Russian Empire was one of the largest nations on Earth. Yet behind its vast territory and military strength lay deep social and economic problems. Millions of peasants lived in poverty. Industrial workers faced difficult conditions, and many people believed that political reform was long overdue. In 1894, Nicholas II became the last Tsar of Russia. He inherited an empire undergoing rapid change, but many believed that the government was struggling to keep pace with growing public demands. Tensions increased as workers, students, and reformers called for greater political participation and improved living conditions. In 1904, Russia entered the Russo-Japanese War. Many expected the Russian Empire to defeat Japan quickly. Instead, Japan won a series of decisive victories on land and at sea. The unexpected defeat damaged confidence in the government and intensified domestic unrest. The following year, peaceful demonstrators marched toward the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg to present a petition to the Tsar. Soldiers opened fire on the crowd in an event remembered as Bloody Sunday. The tragedy sparked strikes, protests, and unrest across the empire. Although Nicholas II introduced limited political reforms and established the State Duma, many Russians believed these measures did not go far enough. In 1914, Russia entered the First World War alongside Britain and France. Russian soldiers fought on the Eastern Front against Germany and Austria-Hungary. The war placed enormous strain on the country's economy and transportation system. Food shortages became common, inflation rose sharply, and military losses mounted. By early 1917, public dissatisfaction had reached a breaking point. Demonstrations erupted in Petrograd, the city formerly known as St. Petersburg. Soldiers increasingly refused to suppress the protests, and support for the monarchy collapsed. In March 1917, Nicholas II abdicated the throne, bringing more than 3 centuries of Romanov rule to an end. A provisional government attempted to lead the country, but it struggled to address the challenges of war, economic hardship, and political division. At the same time, workers' councils known as Soviets gained influence throughout Russia. Later that year, the Bolshevik Party, led by Vladimir Lenin, seized power during the October Revolution. Promising peace, land, and bread, the Bolsheviks withdrew Russia from the First World War and began transforming the country according to socialist principles. The revolution was followed by a devastating civil war between the Bolshevik Red Army and a diverse coalition of anti-Bolshevik forces known as the White Army. The conflict lasted several years, causing widespread destruction, famine, and loss of life. Ultimately, the Bolsheviks emerged victorious. In 1922, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or Soviet Union, was officially established. The new state united Russia with several other republics under a single federal government led by the Communist Party. After Lenin's death in 1924, a struggle for leadership ended with Joseph Stalin consolidating power. Over the following decades, Stalin launched ambitious programs to industrialize the Soviet economy. New factories, dams, and railways transformed the country into one of the world's leading industrial powers. Agriculture was reorganized through collectivization, bringing millions of farms under state control. These policies dramatically changed rural life and were accompanied by severe hardship in many regions. Historians continue to study and debate their long-term consequences, including famine, displacement, and repression. During the 1930s, Stalin also carried out the Great Purge, a campaign in which many political leaders, military officers, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens were arrested, imprisoned, or executed. The period remains one of the most controversial chapters in Soviet history. In 1941, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history. German forces advanced rapidly into Soviet territory, capturing vast areas and threatening major cities. The Soviet people faced extraordinary hardship. The siege of Leningrad lasted nearly 900 days, bringing starvation and immense suffering to civilians. Meanwhile, fierce fighting erupted across the Eastern Front. One of the most decisive battles of the war took place at Stalingrad between 1942 and 1943. After months of brutal urban combat, Soviet forces surrounded and defeated the German Sixth Army. Historians widely regard the Battle of Stalingrad as a major turning point in the Second World War. The Soviet Union continued advancing westward, eventually capturing Berlin in May 1945. Victory came at an enormous human cost. Tens of millions of Soviet citizens lost their lives during the war, leaving a profound impact that is still remembered today. After the war, the Soviet Union emerged as one of two global superpowers alongside the United States. This rivalry became known as the Cold War, a period of political tension, military competition, technological innovation, and ideological conflict that lasted for decades. The Soviet Union achieved significant scientific milestones. In 1957, it launched Sputnik 1, the world's first artificial satellite. 4 years later, Yuri Gagarin became the first human to travel into space, marking a historic achievement in space exploration. Despite these successes, the Soviet economy increasingly faced serious challenges. Slower economic growth, shortages of consumer goods, and rising political pressures led many leaders to recognize the need for reform. During the 1980s, Mikhail Gorbachev introduced reforms known as perestroika, meaning restructuring, and glasnost, meaning openness. These policies aimed to modernize the Soviet system and encourage greater transparency. However, they also accelerated political change across the Soviet republics. In 1991, following a period of political turmoil and unsuccessful attempts to preserve the Union, the Soviet Union was formally dissolved. 15 independent countries emerged from its territory. The Russian Federation became the largest successor state, with Boris Yeltsin serving as its first president. The 1990s were marked by rapid economic transformation, political reform, and significant social challenges. The transition from a centrally planned economy to a market-based system brought new opportunities, but also periods of instability for many citizens. In 2000, Vladimir Putin became president of Russia. During the following years, Russia experienced economic growth, driven in part by energy exports, and reasserted a more prominent role in international affairs. At the same time, domestic political developments and Russia's relationships with other countries have remained the subject of extensive international discussion and debate. Today, Russia remains the largest country in the world by land area, stretching across Europe and Asia. Its history includes the rise of Kievan Rus, the Mongol era, the Tsars, the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, and the modern Russian Federation. Each period has left a lasting mark on its culture, identity, and place in world history. From Viking traders navigating ancient rivers to astronauts orbiting the Earth, Russia's story spans more than 1,000 years of transformation. It is a history shaped by expansion, resilience, innovation, conflict, and profound change of history that continues to influence the world today. If you enjoyed this documentary, consider subscribing for more in-depth histories of countries, civilizations, and empires from around the world.